Chapter 14. Florinda. La Gorda and I were in total agreement that, by the time Zuleika had taught us the intricacies of dreaming, we had accepted the undeniable fact that the rule is a map, and that there is another awareness concealed in us, and that it is possible to enter into that awareness. Don Juan had accomplished what the rule prescribed. The rule determined that his next movement was to introduce me to Florinda, the only one of his warriors whom I had not met. Don Juan told me that I had to go to her house by myself because whatever transpired between Florinda and myself was of no concern to others. He said that Florinda was to be my personal guide, exactly as if I were a Nagual like him. He had had that kind of relationship with the warrior of his benefactor's party who was comparable to Florinda. Don Juan left me one day at the door of Nélida's house. He told me to walk in, that Florinda was waiting for me inside. "It's an honor to make your acquaintance," I said to the woman who was facing me in the hall. "I'm Florinda," she said. We looked at each other in silence. I was awestruck. My state of awareness was as keen as it had ever been. Never again have I experienced a comparable sensation. "That's a beautiful name," I managed to say, but I meant more than that. The soft and long enunciation of the Spanish vowels made the name fluid and sonorous, especially the I after the R. The name was not rare. I simply had never met anyone until that day who was the essence of that name. The woman in front of me fit into it as if it had been made for her, or perhaps as if she herself had made her person fit into it. Physically, she looked exactly like Nélida, except that she seemed more self-confident, more powerful. She had the olive skin of Mediterranean people, Spanish or perhaps French. She was old, and yet she was not feeble or even aged. Her body seemed to be supple and lean, long legs, angular features, small mouth, a beautifully chiseled nose, dark eyes, and braided white hair. No jowls, no sagging skin on her face and neck. She was old as if she had been made up to look old. Remembering in retrospect my first meeting with her, I am reminded of something thoroughly unrelated but apropos. I saw once, in a weekly newspaper, a reprint of a 20-year-old photograph of a then young Hollywood actress who had been made up to look 20 years older in order to play the role of an aging woman. Next to it, the paper had printed a current picture of the same actress as she looked after 20 real years of hard living. Florinda, in my subjective judgment, was like the first picture of the movie actress, a young girl made up to look old. "What do we have here?" she said, pinching me. "You don't look like much. Soft, indulging to the core, no doubt." Her bluntness reminded me of Don Juan's. So did the inner life of her eyes. It had occurred to me, looking back at my life with Don Juan, that his eyes were always in repose. One could see no agitation in them. It was not that Don Juan's eyes were beautiful to look at. I have seen gorgeous eyes, but never have I found them to say anything. Florinda's eyes, like Don Juan's, gave me the feeling that they had witnessed all there is to witness. They were calm, but not bland. The excitement had been driven inward and had turned into something I could only describe as inner life. Florinda took me through the living room and out to a roofed patio. We sat on some comfortable sofa-like chairs. Her eyes seemed to look for something in my face. "Do you know who I am and what I'm supposed to do for you?" she asked. I said that all I knew about her and her relation to me was what Don Juan had sketched out. In the course of explaining my position, I called her Doña Florinda. "Don't call me Doña Florinda," she said with a childish gesture of annoyance and embarrassment. "I'm not that old yet, or even that respectable." I asked her how she expected me to address her. "Just Florinda will do," she said. "Insofar as to who I am, I can tell you right off that I am a woman warrior who knows the secrets of stalking, and insofar as what I am supposed to do for you, I can tell you that I am going to teach you the first 7 principles of stalking, the first 3 principles of the rule for stalkers, and the first 3 maneuvers of stalking." She added that the normal thing was for every warrior to forget what transpires when the interaction is on the left side, and that it would take years for me to come to grips with whatever she was going to teach me. She said that her instruction was merely the beginning, and that someday she would finish teaching me, but under different circumstances. I asked her if she minded my asking her questions. "Do as you please," she said. "All I need from you is your commitment to practice. After all, you know in one way or another, whatever we're going to discuss, your shortcomings are that you have no self-confidence and are unwilling to claim your knowledge as power. The Nagual, being a man, mesmerized you. You cannot act on your own. Only a woman can liberate you from that. I will begin by telling you the story of my life, and in doing so things will become clear to you. I will have to tell it to you in bits, so you will have to come here quite often." Her apparent willingness to tell me about her life struck me as being at odds with the reticence of everyone else to reveal anything personal about themselves. After years with them, I had accepted their ways so unquestioningly that her voluntary intent to reveal her personal life was freakish to me. Her statement put me immediately on guard. "I beg your pardon," I said. "Did you say that you are going to reveal your personal life to me?" "Why not?" she asked. I answered her with a long explanation of what Don Juan had told me about the encumbering force of personal history and the need that a warrior has to erase it. I wrapped it up by telling her that he had prohibited me from ever talking about my life. She laughed in a high falsetto voice. She seemed to be delighted. "That applies only to men," she said. "The not doing of your personal life is to tell endless stories, but not a single one about your real self. You see, being a man means that you have a solid history behind you. You have family, friends, acquaintances, and every one of them has a definite idea of you. Being a man means that you're accountable. You cannot disappear that easily. In order to erase yourself, you needed a lot of work. My case is different. I'm a woman, and that gives me a splendid advantage. I'm not accountable. Don't you know that women are not accountable?" "I don't know what you mean by accountable," I said. "I mean that a woman can easily disappear," she replied. "A woman can, if nothing else, get married. A woman belongs to the husband. In a family with lots of children, the daughters are discarded very early. No one counts on them, and chances are that some will vanish without leaving a trace. Their disappearance is easily accepted. A son, on the other hand, is something one banks on. It's not that easy for a son to slip off and vanish, and even if he does, he will leave traces behind him. A son feels guilty for disappearing. A daughter does not. When the Nagual trained you to keep your mouth shut about your personal life, he intended to help you to overcome your feeling of having done wrong to your family and friends who were counting on you one way or another. After a lifetime struggle, the male warrior ends up, of course, erasing himself, but that struggle takes its toll on the man. He becomes secretive, forever on guard against himself. A woman doesn't have to contend with that hardship. A woman is already prepared to disintegrate into thin air. In fact, it's expected of her. Being a woman, I'm not compelled to secrecy. I don't give a fig about it. Secrecy is the price you men have to pay for being important to society. The struggle is only for the men because they resent erasing themselves and would find curious ways to pop up somewhere, somehow. Take yourself, for instance. You go around giving lectures. Florinda made me nervous in a very peculiar way. I felt strangely restless in her presence. I would admit without hesitation that Don Juan and Silvio Manuel also made me feel nervous and apprehensive, but it was a different feeling. I was actually afraid of them. especially Silvio Manuel. He terrified me, and yet I had learned to live with my terror. Florinda did not frighten me. My nervousness was rather the result of being annoyed, threatened by her savoir-faire. She didn't stare at me the way Don Juan or Silvio Manuel used to. They would always fix their eyes on me until I moved my face away in a gesture of submission. Florinda only glanced at me. Her eyes moved continually from thing to thing. She seemed to examine not only my eyes, but every inch of my face and body. As she talked, she would shift in quick glances from my face to my hands, or to her feet, or to the roof. "I make you ill at ease, don't I?" she asked. Her question caught me thoroughly off guard. I laughed. Her tone was not threatening at all. "You do," I said. "Oh, it's perfectly understandable," she went on. "You are used to being a man. A woman for you is something made for your benefit. A woman is stupid to you. And the fact that you're a man and the Nagual makes things even more difficult." I felt obligated to defend myself. I thought that she was a very opinionated lady, and I wanted to tell her so. I started off in great form, but petered out almost immediately upon hearing her laughter. It was a joyous, youthful laughter. Don Juan and Don Genaro used to laugh at me all the time, and their laughter was also youthful, but Florinda's had a different vibration. There was no hurry in her laughter, no pressure. "I think we'd better go inside," she said. "There shouldn't be any distractions. The Nagual Juan Matus has already taken you around, showing you the world. That was important for what he had to tell you. I have other things to talk about, which require another setting." We sat on a leather couch in a den off the patio. I felt more at ease indoors. She went right into the story of her life. She said that she had been born in a fairly large Mexican city to a well-to-do family. As she was an only child, her parents spoiled her from the moment she was born. Without a trace of false modesty, Florinda admitted that she had always been aware of being beautiful. She said that beauty is a demon that breeds and proliferates when admired. She assured me that she could say without the shadow of a doubt that that demon is the hardest one to overcome, and that if I would look around to find those who were beautiful, I would find the most wretched beings imaginable. I did not want to argue with her, yet I had the most intense desire to tell her that she was somehow dogmatic. She must have caught my feelings. She winked at me. "They are wretched. You'd better believe it," she continued. "Try them. Be unwilling to go along with their idea that they are beautiful and because of it important. You'll see what I mean." She said that she could hardly give her parents or herself full blame for her conceit. Everyone around her had conspired from her infancy to make her feel important and unique. "When I was 15, she went on, I thought I was about the greatest thing that ever came to earth. Everybody said so, especially men." She confessed that throughout her adolescent years, she indulged in the attention and adulation of scores of admirers. At 18, she judiciously chose the best possible husband from the ranks of no less than 11 serious suitors. She married Celestino, a man of means, 15 years her senior. Florinda described her married life as heaven on earth. To the enormous circle of friends she already had, she added Celestino's friends. The total effect was that of a perennial holiday. Her bliss, however, lasted only 6 months, which went by almost unnoticed. It all came to a most abrupt and brutal end when she contracted a mysterious and crippling disease. Her left foot, ankle, and calf began to swell. The line of her beautiful leg was ruined. The swelling became so intense that the cutaneous tissues started to blister and burst. Her whole lower leg, from the knee down, became the site of scabs and a pestilent secretion. The skin became hard. The disease was diagnosed as elephantiasis. Doctors' attempts to cure her condition were clumsy and painful, and their final conclusion was that only in Europe were their medical centers advanced enough to possibly undertake a cure. In a matter of 3 months, Florinda's paradise had turned into hell on earth. Desperate and in true agony, she wanted to die rather than go on. Her suffering was so pathetic that one day a servant girl, not being able to bear it any longer, confessed to her that she had been bribed by Celestino's former mistress to slip a certain concoction into her food, a poison manufactured by sorcerers. The servant girl, as an act of contrition, promised to take her to a curer, a woman reported to be the only person who could counteract such a poison. Florinda chuckled, remembering her dilemma. She had been raised a devout Catholic. She did not believe in witchcraft or in Indian curers, but her pain was so intense and her condition so serious that she was willing to try anything. Celestino was deadly opposed. He wanted to turn the servant girl over to the authorities. Florinda interceded, not so much out of compassion, but out of the fear that she might not find the curer on her own. Florinda suddenly stood up. She told me that I had to leave. She held my arm and walked me to the door as if I had been her oldest and dearest friend. She explained that I was exhausted because to be in the left side awareness is a special and frail condition which has to be used sparingly. It certainly is not a state of power. The proof was that I had nearly died when Silvio Manuel had tried to rally my second attention by forcing me to enter boldly into it. She said that there is no way on earth that we can order anyone or ourselves to rally knowledge. It is rather a slow affair. The body, at the right time and under the proper circumstances of impeccability, rallies its knowledge without the intervention of desire. We stood at the front door for a while, exchanging pleasant remarks and trivialities. She suddenly said that the reason the Nagual Juan Matus had brought me to her that day was because he knew that his time on earth was coming to an end. The 2 forms of instruction that I had received according to Silvio Manuel's master plan had already been completed. All that was left pending was what she had to say to me. She stressed that hers was not instruction proper, but rather the establishing of my link to her. The next time Don Juan took me to see Florinda, just before he left me at the door, he repeated what she had told me, that the time was approaching for him and his party to enter into the third attention. Before I could question him, he shoved me inside the house. His shove sent me not only into the house, but into my keenest state of awareness. I saw the wall of fog. Florinda was standing in the hall as if she had been waiting for Don Juan to shove me in. She held my arm and quietly led me to the living room. We sat down. I wanted to start a conversation, but I could not talk. She explained that a shove from an impeccable warrior like the Nagual Juan Matus can cause a shift into another area of awareness. She said that my mistake all along had been to believe that the procedures are important. The procedure of shoving a warrior into another state of consciousness is utilizable only if both participants, especially the one who shoves, are impeccable and imbued with personal power. The fact that I was seeing the wall of fog made me feel utterly nervous on a physical level. My body was shaking uncontrollably. Florinda said that my body was shaking because it had learned to crave for activity while it remained in that state of awareness, and that my body could also learn to focus its keenest attention on whatever was being said, rather than whatever was being done. She told me then that to be placed on the left side consciousness was an expediency. By forcing me into a state of heightened awareness and allowing me to interact with his warriors only when I was in that state, the Nagual Juan Matus was making sure that I would have a ledge to stand on. Florinda said that his strategy was to cultivate a small part of the other self by deliberately filling it with memories of interaction. The memories are forgotten only to resurface someday in order to serve as a rational outpost from where to depart into the immeasurable vastness of the other self. Because I was so nervous, she proposed to calm me down by proceeding with the story of her life, which, she clarified, was not really the story of her life as a woman in the world, but the story of how a crummy woman was helped to become a warrior. She said that once she made up her mind to see the curer, there was no other way to stop her. She started off carried on a stretcher by the servant girl and 4 men on the 2-day trip that changed the course of her life. There were no roads. It was mountainous, and sometimes the men had to carry her on their backs. They arrived at the curer's house at dusk. The place was well lit, and there were lots of people in the house. Florinda said that a polite old man told her that the curer was away for the day treating a patient. The man seemed to be very well informed about the curer's activities, and Florinda found it easy to talk to him. He was solicitous, and he confided that he was a patient himself. He described his disease as an incurable condition that made him oblivious to the world. They chatted amicably until late. The old man was so helpful that he even gave Florinda his bed so she could rest and wait until the next day when the curer would return. In the morning, Florinda said that she was suddenly awakened by a sharp pain in her leg. A woman was moving her leg, pressing it with a piece of shiny wood. The curer was a very pretty woman, Florinda went on. She took a look at my leg and shook her head. I know who has done this to you, she said. He must have been handsomely paid, or he must have surmised that you are a useless human being. Which do you think it was? Florinda laughed. She said that she thought the curer was either crazy or was being rude. She had no conception that anyone in the world could possibly believe that she was a useless human being. Even though she was in excruciating pain, she let the woman know in so many words that she was a rich and worthy person and nobody's fool. Florinda recalled that the curer changed her attitude on the spot. She seemed to have gotten scared. She respectfully addressed her as Missy and got up from her chair and ordered everyone out of the room. When they were alone, the curer sat on Florinda's chest and pushed her head backward over the edge of the bed. Florinda said that she fought her. She thought that she was going to be killed. She tried to scream to alert her servants, but the curer quickly covered her head with a blanket and plugged her nose. Florinda gasped for air and had to breathe through her open mouth. The more the curer pressed on Florinda's chest and the tighter she plugged her nose, the wider Florinda opened her mouth. When she realized what the curer was really doing, she had already drunk the foul liquid contents of a large bottle which the curer had put into her open mouth. Florinda commented that the curer had maneuvered her so well that she didn't even choke, in spite of the fact that her head was dangling over the side of the bed. I drank so much liquid that I was about to get sick, Florinda continued. She made me sit up and looked right into my eyes without blinking. I wanted to put my finger down my throat and vomit. She slapped me until my lips bled. An Indian slapping me, drawing blood from my lips. Neither my father nor my mother had ever laid a hand on me. My surprise was so great that I forgot the discomfort in my stomach. She called my men and told them to take me home. Then she leaned over and put her mouth to my ear so no one would hear. "If you don't come back in 9 days, you asshole," she whispered, "you'll swell up like a toad and wish to God you were dead." Florinda said that the liquid had irritated her throat and vocal cords. She couldn't utter a word. This, however, was the least of her worries. When she arrived at her home, Celestino was waiting in a state of frenzy. Being incapable of speaking, Florinda was in the position to observe him. She noticed that his anger had nothing to do with worrying about her health, but with concern about his standing as a man of wealth and social status. He could not bear to be seen by his influential friends as resorting to Indian curers. He was raging, shouting that he was going to take his complaint to the army headquarters, have the soldiers capture the woman curer, and bring her to town to be thrashed and thrown in jail. These were not just empty threats. He actually pressed a military commander to send a patrol after the cure. The soldiers came back a few days later with the news that the woman had fled. Florinda was put at ease by her maid, who assured her that the cure would be waiting for her if she cared to go back. Although the inflammation of her throat persisted to the point that she couldn't eat solid food and could barely swallow liquids, Florinda could hardly wait for the day when she was supposed to go back to see the curer. The medicine had eased the pain in her leg. When she let Celestino know her intentions, he became furious enough to round up some help in order to put an end to the nonsense himself. He and 3 of his trusted men went on horseback ahead of her. Florinda said that when she arrived at the curer's house, she expected to find her perhaps dead, but instead she found Celestino sitting alone. He had sent his men to 3 different places in the vicinity with orders to bring back the curer by force if necessary. Florinda saw the same old man she had met before. He was trying to calm her husband down, assuring him that any one of his men would be back shortly with the woman. As soon as Florinda was placed on a cot in the front porch, the curer stepped out of the house. She began to insult Celestino, calling him names, yelling obscenities at him, until she got him so angry that he rushed to strike her. The old man held him back and begged him not to hit her. He implored on his knees, pointing out that she was an old woman. Celestino was unmoved. He said that he was going to horsewhip her, regardless of her age. He advanced to grab her, but was stopped cold. 6 awesome-looking men came out from behind the bushes, wielding their machetes. Florinda said that fear froze Celestino to the spot. He was ashen. The curer came to him and told him that either he would meekly let her whip him on the buttocks, or her helpers would hack him to pieces. As proud a man as he was, he bent over meekly to be whipped. The curer had reduced him in a few moments to a helpless man. She laughed in his face. She knew that he was pinned down, and she let him sink. He had walked into her trap, like the careless fool that he was, drunk with his own inflated ideas about his worth. Florinda looked at me and smiled. She was quiet for a while. The first principle of the art of stalking is that warriors choose their battleground, she said. A warrior never goes into battle without knowing what their surroundings are. The woman curer had shown me, through her battle with Celestino, the first principle of stalking. Then she came over to where I was lying down. I was crying. That was the only thing I could do. She seemed concerned. She tucked my blanket around my shoulders and smiled and winked at me. "The deal is still on, asshole," she said. "Come back as soon as you can if you want to live. But don't bring your master with you, you little whore. Come only with those who are absolutely necessary." Florinda fixed her eyes on me for a moment. From her silence, I surmised that she wanted my comments. To discard everything that is unnecessary is the second principle of the art of stalking, she said, without giving me time to say anything. Her account had absorbed me so intensely that I had not noticed that the wall of fog had disappeared, or when. I simply realized that it wasn't there anymore. Florinda got up from her chair and led me to the door. We stood there for a while, as we had done at the end of our first meeting. Florinda said that Celestino's anger had also permitted the curer to point out, not to her reason but to her body, the first 3 precepts of the rule for stalkers. Although her mind was focused entirely on herself, since nothing else existed for her outside her physical pain and the anguish of losing her beauty, still her body had acknowledged what had happened, and needed later on only a reminder in order to put everything in place. Warriors don't have the world to cushion them, so they must have the rule, she went on. yet the rule of stalkers applies to everyone. Celestino's arrogance was his undoing and the beginning of my instruction and liberation. His self-importance, which was also mine, forced us both to believe that we were above practically everybody. The Curer brought us down to what we really are. Nothing. The first precept of the rule is that everything that surrounds us is an unfathomable mystery. The second precept of the rule is that we must try to unravel these mysteries, but without ever hoping to accomplish this. The third, that a warrior, aware of the unfathomable mystery that surrounds him and aware of his duty to try to unravel it, takes his rightful place among mysteries and regards himself as one. Consequently, for a warrior, there is no end to the mystery of being, whether being means being a pebble or an ant or oneself. That is a warrior's humbleness. One is equal to everything. There was a long and forced silence. Florinda smiled, playing with the tip of her long braid. She said that I had had enough. The third time I went to see Florinda, Don Juan didn't leave me at the door, but walked in with me. All the members of his party were congregated in the house, and they greeted me as if I were returning home from a long trip. It was an exquisite event. It integrated Florinda with the rest of them in my feelings, since that was the first time she had joined them while I was present.